Hello, everybody, and here we are. This is What is Spirit, Part 5, an exploration into the Holy Grail as it pertains to the work of Dr. Rudolf Steiner, which is quite a task considering it's in excess of 6,000 lectures and 50 published books and articles. But I'm happy to say that I have a good friend of mine here, Joe Visconti, and he's had a lifetime of study in the work of Rudolf Steiner, and as have I since about junior high, or as they call it today, middle school, since I first became aware of his work and it rang a bell in my heart. And so I was on the phone with Joe just this morning, and we were discussing some things, and we said, hey, let's do a show today. He said, okay. And so here we are, Joe Visconti in West Hartford, Connecticut. I'm John Barnwell, and I'm here north of the city of Detroit, the Straits d'Etoile. So, Joe, how you doing there, buddy?
Pretty good, John. I live about quarter of a mile from the birthplace of Noah Webster. And since we're speaking about Rudolf Steiner or anthroposophy or anything, words have meaning. Words matter. Black lives matter, white lives matter, every life matters, but words matter. And we are living in that time when the meaning of words have just come under assault, so that the public is almost like the Tower of Babel. And a quick story on Noah Webster. When he left his home here in West Hartford at about 21, his father said, your brother and I have to, work the farm. You've got a degree from Yale. And so he went over to the Hudson River, Sharon, Connecticut to teach. And he speaks about it in all of his diaries. And he speaks about the fact that no one at the crossings, there was no bridges across the Hudson. Everyone was speaking a different dialect, and it was like the Tower of Babel, from different languages to different dialects to American Indians, and nobody could understand each other. And we don't realize that in our time as English being the common language. But so words have always been a problem in history, and more fights and wars have broken out because of the misinterpretation of meaning in your family life, in your marriage life, nations against nations, as the American Indian used to say, white man talk with forked tongue. Yeah, so that forked tongue is really what we're going to talk about today.
Good. Yeah, I was trying to find something, but I was unsuccessful, and that doesn't matter. Yeah, it brings to mind a mentor of my family on my mother's side, Father Solanus Casey. And Father Solanus Casey was a very simple man intellectually, but very much blessed, and ended up becoming canonized by the church, and many miracles are attributed to him. But he was the mentor of my great-grandfather. And I've told this story, but I'm going to tell it again because it has a lot of, it has wings, shall we say. But my great-grandfather was the owner of a construction company, John Finn and Sons, and they built Henry Ford's first plant, a big assembly plant, the Highland Park plant, they call it here, and great many of the great homes in Grosse Pointe and on Boston Boulevard, Chicago Boulevard, and people that are in the Detroit area will know what I'm talking about. But he also built most of the Catholic churches and schools throughout the greater metropolitan area. And he was a very significant figure within the city of Detroit. And when he passed away, he's Irish, of course, And so they had a wake at his home on Boston Boulevard. And everybody showed up, you know, Fords, Dodges, all the notables. They were friends of his. And Father Solanus shows up after they've been all, you know, paying their respects. And he went up there. And he was up there about 5 minutes with my great-grandfather laying deceased on the bed, having died like the other day. And so after about 5 minutes, my great-grandfather chimes out, "Get me some water." And he came back from the dead after being visited by Father Solanus. Kind of a Lazarus experience, so to speak. But this really kind of crusty businessman became this reverent, gentle soul after having such an experience. And so there is that. Many people have stories that are similar, near-death experiences and all of that can bring one across the threshold, and to be able to return. Some are flying above their body looking down at it. Well, I had that experience, but I didn't have to die to experience it, so I guess I'm fortunate in that regard. But back when I was about 19, I was up on the ceiling looking down at the top of my head for no reason at all. And no, I wasn't under the influence of anything. It was just a sunny early afternoon. But so there are these experiences that people have that bring them into a relationship with the supersensible. But when you approach something like that, it's very, very helpful if you can try and figure out, well, what does this mean? What is the significance of this? And Joe, I think you really have a gift for framing these types of ideas.
Well, thank you. And you know, it was coming to me about before I got on the program with you. You know how these things are. You obtained insights that you know, and they just surface, kind of like dolphins. We're doing a program, and or even if it's a political or non-spiritual program, and in life things surface. I call them like dolphins. The ideas just come up from the subconscious. They're not sharks. The dolphins, they jump out of the water at the ship of your consciousness going across. And I was thinking about Rudolf Steiner and how for so many decades reading his books, he'll have a subject matter and the name of a chapter of a book or a lecture. And when he starts off, he completely goes in a direction that doesn't seem linked at all to what he's going to speak about. It's like, did they put the wrong chapter heading name on this chapter? By the end, by the end of the chapter, if you could keep going with it, and your mind, your supervisory consciousness, I call it, is peeking down, going, "What's going on here?" And lo and behold, he'll come to the thing that he spoke about from a place that has no connection whatsoever to what you would think from the average mind of the average person of the world, that title of that chapter or that book could actually be speaking about that subject or what you perceive that subject should be about. And it's just amazing that, you know, when we look at each of the subjects that we'll talk about today and how they will be connected, but while we deliver them, while we speak about them, they'll have insights that come up like dolphins, and it's very scary to the left brain scientist or materialist to be able to speak on subjects when, you know, I always remember my town council was a counselor in our town here, and we give the public 3 minutes to speak, and they'd have to, if they didn't stay on the subject matter, start wandering off. You know, the mayor, whoever's running the meeting, would say, you know, you have to stay on subject, so you're not allowed to go off that subject. You have to stay right on this thing of the topic of the agenda today. And so much of our life is like that, trying to focus into places, and the answers are not that they're not in the subject matter, but we don't relate them. We don't allow those answers or suggestions or ideas that would solve the riddles of our problems or wonder. And they're always around us, and we could just, one of Rudolf Steiner's exercises is open-mindedness. And we think we have an open mind, but we don't.
Yes, that is basically the nexus of this challenge, because when you get into studying, like on my other shows with Reverend David, I call it what is truth, because that's the way in which Jesus Christ responded to being asked that question by Pontius Pilate. He didn't say anything. Elsewhere, he says, I am the way, the truth, and the light. Although perhaps Pontius Pilate didn't get the memo, but when you listen to things of that nature, you have to have a really broad perspective to be able to put it somewhere and have it meaningful in your life. Okay, fine. He's the way and the truth and the life. Well, what does that mean? I mean, let's see, the way, well, he's showing us a way in which we can live our lives and come out with a wholesome result at the end. And the means for doing that is by adhering to the truth and to try and figure out, when you're confronted with a situation, is this true? Is this really what's going on, or am I just being sold a bill of goods, which is what's been going on since they pulled back the Smith-Muntak back in 2012, for example. So all of a sudden they can do things now on cable and TV that they couldn't do since 1948. And so there's all this swirl of data that we're all submerged in, and it's very important to be able to qualify the information you're getting and be able to try and connect it together in a way that's meaningful, or it just creates this unusual bubble of fear. And that's really what the people that like to control things would like nothing better than for you to just hold back in fear. And so there's a quote I've shared numerous times, but this is so central to what we hope to be doing here. And it's quoted Rudolf Steiner: "We must eradicate from the soul all fear and terror of what comes towards us out of the future. We must acquire serenity in all feelings and sensations about the future. We must look forward with absolute equanimity to everything that may come. And we must think only that whatever comes is given to us by a world-directive full of wisdom. It is part of what we must learn in this age, namely, to live out of pure trust, without any security in existence. Trust in the ever-present help of the spiritual world. Truly nothing else will do if our courage is not to fail us. And let us seek the awakening from within ourselves every morning and evening." And so there you have it. Our goal here is the first thing that we have to accomplish is to not be living in fear.
Yeah, and that's prevalent in our time. Everything, if you turn the news on, as we all know, everything would scare the bejesus out of you. Nuclear war around the corner. Every ghost and monster coming at you in your nightlife, in your dreams. And it is courage. I was just speaking to some friends that we had some coffee this morning at one of our local restaurants, a couple of buddies of mine, and we were talking about this exact subject, not from Steiner's point of view, but about the world. Everything on our challenges seem, just in your daily life without anything spiritual, seem like when you have a problem or an anxiety or trouble, that we can actually make it seem bigger and make it bigger by our own imagination that it is. And our imagination could run wild at all the possibilities of things that can go wrong and should go wrong and could go wrong. And Rudolf Steiner does speak about the things in our lives that are being stopped from happening. Talk about karma. How many things are prevented from occurring to us? So there has to be trust. We do know that, though. Everyone who's had a challenge at 6 years old, 10 years old, 20, 30, 40 years, I don't care what the age, whatever the challenge was, if it looked like a monster, it looks like it was overwhelming, whether it was financial, love, business. And then when it approaches to become resolved, we realize that was resolved. Boy, how did that get resolved? I feared the worst. I was worried all night. I was up all night thinking that if we worry, when Jesus says, do not worry, if we worry, somehow that will help. Almost like a reverse prayer or novena or something that if we worry more about it, we're actually pedaling faster and we're doing something by worrying. But we are constantly amazed, and we get older, we realize it'll be taken care of. It'll be taken care of. You're participating, but at the same time, when you look for those solutions, when you look for those remedies, that it will appear, and almost like what Steiner speaks about, what the master told him in his hour of need. One of the two things he had to be aware of is in his hour of need, he'll be saved. And that's for all of us. Truly, in our hour of need, the success, the answer comes. But most people in our time look for the credit cards or look for the magic drug or something. They don't want to go to reach that hour of need, that hour at the abyss, when you stand right there and face the abyss, which is where it comes from. So there's such an avoidance in our time to be close, except for those that are homeless, those that are destitute, those that are ill. They're right there. They're beyond their hour of need. And when we look at them, we're afraid and we run from them because why? They have crossed over the hour of need, a place we don't want to ever get close to, a place we don't want to be near. And this is where Christ is found, with the destitute, with the helpless, with those that have passed that hour of need or are approaching it. So the courage really is to face what? To face the truth. And the way is that the way is that the help is there. And the truth will come in its completion, and the whole truth and nothing but the truth. It will come in time, over time, to resolve our issues, for growth. Because every one of these life experiences we're having are part of growth. And so people are afraid of what? They're afraid to grow, to change, to transform, not into some unknown thing, but to become more complete. And so the courage, John, you hit it right on the head. That courage is what? The courage to recognize that there is a spiritual world, and it is here always working with us, whether we reject it, run from it, and do not want to participate in it, don't understand it, or it's boring, but only until we need it. Do you see people clutching the rosaries, clutching the prayers, even if they're not religious, they're reaching out for that unknown. Everyone knows it's there, and so many people are afraid of it. Don't fear it. Embrace it. Embrace the unknown.
Yes. I mean, ultimately, the final decision is ours. And there's a difference between being compelled to become a member of some kind of international religious persuasion of any type whatsoever. That's vastly different than of one's own free will and accord. One comes to find their path toward the world of spirit. And since our show here is what is spirit, it makes it very central to our conversation here. And so in studying spiritual science, the work of Rudolf Steiner, he gives you a methodology to be able to come into relationship with the worlds of soul and spirit that are so described by St. Paul in Scripture. And it was in 869 AD that they made the decision within the church that a human being wasn't body, soul, and spirit, that they were body and soul, and they could have spiritual qualities, but that they were not a part of it directly. And that was a major step. Of course, it was in keeping with the evolution of mankind at that time, within the period in which they were dwelling. The development of the intellectual soul was still central. So you have a representative of that time, for example, St. Thomas Aquinas, and you have St. Francis of Assisi, and all these individuals, Bernard of Clairvaux, people that are so monumental, so just towering figures that have these levels of conviction of which we can only stand back in awe. And so when you get into that, when you understand the mindset of a crusader or even of a Viking or anybody, it's like, what is it that they have that enables them to be so fearless? I mean, you talk about the Irish monks going into Europe and converting the pagans. I mean, a guy all by himself just walks into camp and starts telling him he's got some good news for him. You know, he wants to tell him about this new thing, and you have to go, okay, how did these guys even survive that? Because things were so tribal, so insular. Everybody had their tribal bubble, and they had little more than mistrust of anybody from somebody else's tribal bubble. But it was the quality of the being that was presenting himself to them, that it was a qualitative thing, which, because of their relationship to the old ways, still maintained aspects of atavistic clairvoyance, that they could see certain supersensible aspects of an individual when they had them before them. And so to see a truly saintly figure, not a televangelist, although some of those may be good, they may be not. I don't know. I haven't vetted them. But the point is that when you have a profundity of soul of somebody that's on that level, like St. Francis, that, you know, the town was distressed because there was a wolf that was attacking their flocks and their sheep and the ducks and the geese and the chickens and everything. And he was just really terrorizing this town and putting the people at danger. And so St. Francis went and found the wolf, right? And he has a heart-to-heart with him, so to speak, as really only St. Francis could. And it turned out that the wolf ceased to be a problem and would actually act as like a protector of the village. And so there are certain miraculous forces that can work in the world. And in fact, they're always working in the world. You just haven't noticed. And that's part of the distinction that Rudolf Steiner makes between individuals of the ancient world and individuals so often in modern times, is that it was a given to the ancients that there were worlds of soul and spirit, because they had a relationship to them that they could perceive, or at least have the memory of the perception. And as we moved forward in time, all the way up to the middle of the 13th century, where we reached a point where there was nobody clairvoyant at that time, and then unfolding into the future, we see these future stages of development to where mankind is coming toward an opportunity to have a whole new relationship, because in entering into the realms of soul and spirit with the developed level of thinking, of which is the gift of this isolation from the worlds of soul and spirit, we can approach the spiritual world in a new way with this gift of being able to have self-reference, say I, and be able to use our developed thinking to be able to evaluate our experiences when we cross the threshold. And so that's something that's, in my mind, a worthwhile goal.
It sure is. You mentioned something earlier about me framing situations. That comes from a lot of my political experience, and that's usually based on law and zoning ordinances or state law, whatever the topic in whatever government office that is. And so that you're constantly in the real political, let's just say the elected position of having to base things on what's been built already. And you get to maybe put some window dressing on or some wallpaper up, like I wallpapered my Indian wallpaper of elephants behind me years ago. But that framing process, I was raised as by a builder. My dad was a contractor builder, and it's amazing to take from a blueprint or a sketch and actually start building, digging the trench. Done that when I was a kid. My father didn't have backhoes, so he had a lot of my Italian uncles and cousins, and they start digging into the earth and digging the trench, and I'd bring them water, and we'd form up around, and a concrete truck would come in at 1 o'clock to start pouring concrete and framing that foundation. So digging down first, putting a footing in. How does that relate to Rudolf Steiner concepts of the cosmogony and the cosmology of the universe? The basis, that ground that we build the house on, our ideas, our opinions. What is the house? Is it a real house? Or is it theory? But as I've built so many homes and renovated buildings and you name it over 40 years, it was amazing to see when you start, especially fresh building, in what was just a yard or a space or something, and before you know it, there's a footing, and then there's the framing of the floor and the plywood, and then there's the walls go up. And immediately when you start putting the rafters up for the floor above you, and if there's a second floor, you start to feel a sense, really in real time, that idea from the blueprint and the building permit that you're working on, and you can feel it as a builder or a mason, the masons and the framers of the Constitution. You're actually now within a space that you've built, and there's something that starts to protect you. You start feeling a sense of security and limitation, because right now the wall's there and there's a hole in the wall that you've framed for the window, and yet it's not totally secure, but there's this hole when you start finishing the, and then never mind the interior, when you start completing the structure and the roof is up and maybe the windows are in and it's not all finished inside, you have this feeling of enclosure, of protection, of limitation. The protection comes from the limitation. So this framing of ideas on what the spirit is, the spiritual activity is the combining of these materials, of these bits of truth that pull together into, it's always a house. It's always the mound builders, the pyramids built. The building process is always being done by us in our daily life. We're constantly either renovating our situations in life, our business plans, our personal life, but there's a constant building, redoing, redecorating, upgrading. This is the activity of the spirit. And you really have to think about people who say, what is that? Well, it's intangible. We're dealing with tangible things on the external, but we're dealing with spiritual powers, spiritual consciousness. And we have, especially a child, have immense courage to stand upright, to take the first step, or we have new challenges. And every day this is occurring to everybody. Getting the car started up, start the commuter, and go to work. You don't know what the road's going to bring. You don't know the dangers on the road, the parking garage, everything that we get used to. But it really is spiritual activity that in the formative process of our daily challenges, our daily simple tasks, checking your phone, turning on a light, closing a door. Every one of these things the human being and we are doing within the house, and we're building constantly and renovating constantly. We miss the participation of that in our time because it's so fast. Things are coming at us so quickly. But when we do sit down and think about something, think about it. What are we going to do in the backyard? What are we going to do with the barbecue, the brick patio? You're using your spiritual activity. They call it mental imagination. It's spiritual activity, formative. Some things you're tearing down, some things you're throwing out. You don't need them. That doesn't work. This works. Take a look at what we're doing, really in practical. Jesus was a carpenter. In all practicality, it's built on a foundation. And the foundation normally is, what do I want to do? What interests me? What do I have to do? And you go from there, and every little task. So the spirit is not far away. It's in our daily practice, yet we fail to comprehend that we are the master builders all the time, and we are creating with these powers and these hierarchies our realities constantly, yet we just haven't given the credit or the understanding to what's participating with us.
Yes.
That took you down a different road there.
So
You said it, framing. You said framing.
beauty, and our intention, we're having a conversation. We thought we'd let a few people eavesdrop, and so that's okay. This thing is spontaneous, as they say. But that brings to mind some very specific ideas. If you get into studying the Kabbalah, for example, it gets into the mystery of letters and numbers and all of that. But the second letter of the Hebrew alphabet is B, Beth. And it represents that feeling of security within an enclosure. It's a house,
Yeah.
And so there is that. And in Rudolf Steiner's work, he talks about in relation to, well, you have a whole developed teaching, and mind you, those have followed for some time. I've probably been amiss, not stressing the importance of becoming familiar with his 5 basic books. That's Knowledge of Higher Worlds and Its Attainment, Esoteric Science and Outline, or Occult Science and Outline, and then there's the Christianity as a Mystical Fact, and you have the Philosophy of Freedom, also at times named the Philosophy of Spiritual Activity, and perhaps the easiest book to start out with in a certain regard, esoterically speaking, is his book Theosophy, in which he explains the different levels of being as one moves across the threshold into the next world. But that is something that can give you that kind of foundation, because within his work, he at points refers to that you're building a hut. You're establishing this like enclosure that in which you have the central basis, the central theme of your personal relationship to the world, whatever that may be. And it really doesn't matter. It's for anybody in any walk of life, but that you develop this foundation, this fundament, like Joe was referring to here, when you have to first build the foundation, because if you don't get that right, the whole building will be unstable and it will not be safe even. And so there's these certain fundamental ideas. If somebody has a tendency to just wish to go to scripture, then I say, the Sermon on the Mount, the Lord's Prayer, and the first 14 verses of the Gospel of John. Well, that's pretty much all one needs to be able to align oneself with what we're discussing here today. But for those that wish to go further, all these things are described in more detail than, it gets into the territory of I didn't know, because there really is, it's vast. But that shouldn't create a fear in oneself. Oh, geez, what am I supposed to do? I'm just starting. I haven't studied all this. In fact, one of my friends was, my new friends from doing this podcast, Ray, was saying to me, he felt bad because he had come to Rudolf Steiner so late, but that's okay, because you don't know that. You may have been with him in previous incarnations or not. That's the point, is that you're engaged in building that hut, that you're working on the work, and that you have things that you've done and many other incarnations that are of value and are a part of that fundamental structure that's called you. And so it behooves oneself to be able to rest easy with that confidence that Rudolf Steiner stresses in that quote, that fearlessness, to have the courage to know it's okay. You don't really have to have the multitudinous details all memorized and all of that. It's a beautiful thing to do it. There's no question about it. And without Rudolf Steiner's work, I don't know what I would have done, because there are certain aspects to his work that are not to be found anywhere else.
Yeah, the hut also is the temple, and the temple building. And to your point about the average person, I have friends also that we speak about Rudolf Steiner. They don't know much, and they feel they're in their 40s, some are in their 50s, and they can't catch up. Talked about this on Douglas Gabriel's program. I was on with him about a week or two ago. And this thing, and I really harp on it a lot, because I do get this in politics. I get this even in new people that want to come into the construction business. They don't have the experience. They don't know enough. They're afraid, or they just wonder. And it's not a good wonder. It's a wonder, fear, wonder, worry, I call it, where they wonder, and that opens up to worry and fear. And these are dark forces that have their place in life. They limit us from like jumping off a cliff without a parachute or something. So fear is not a bad thing when it's properly utilized, but when fear is in the wrong domain, it can be limiting. But this information, it's like, I would say, going to maybe your local drugstore or little shop that has some things that you need, or a hardware store. Instead of, you didn't make it to Home Depot where they have everything, or you didn't make it to a big shopping center for your big Y or whatever they have out in your neck of the woods, Stop and Shop over here, but you got the little groceries from the small little bodega, whatever it was you needed. There's no difference. The quantity and size and more in information, and that is not really what's going to make this more important. And I felt that very young, that it would take a lifetime and I would never scratch the surface. But I personally wanted to understand. And I think if you want to try to understand, those questions about what you need to understand will come out of you. And you'll put your hand, just like in regular life, put your hand right on the right book on the shelf, or find that right thing that you're questing after. And that goes back to the Grail. It goes back to the quest. What is the quest? What are we constantly searching? And if we are searching, is there higher parts of our being and other spiritual beings in Christ, in guardian angels, or are there things there that we kind of all know something's up in our life, even if we don't study any of this, or if we're not religious, we know there's something else working with us. If you have enough just physical materialistic experience, hey, how did that happen? Hey, did that happen? I know I didn't do that. If you're objective, a lot of these things in your life are not occurring without the participation of some form of intelligence, cooperation, in, call it luck and chance, but nobody's that lucky in some of life circumstances. So we do have these things that are happening in the world. So if you don't have a million books and you don't have hours and years of detailed study, it all, as John has said, it all has to be forgotten. You have to forget this to know it. So as you unearth it and bring it up into your consciousness, it goes back, almost like you're tilling land and soil, and the ingredients after you till it go back to make the plants grow. It's growing and active even after you do know this. So many of my decades of study and meditation, they have gone not back to sleep, because they're in a different state than sleep. They're not dormant. They're actively there, but they're necessarily having to come to the workstation for the moment. But whatever it is you're working on, the mysteries of each simple thing that you may know or grab a hold of, even the Bible, will be something as great as the greatest thinkers and all of Rudolf Steiner's work. It will all be found encapsulated, because the spirit, as we know, is not given in measure. And it's not something that measure, number, and weight of the Earth's realm can quantify. And so we got the temptation from the dark forces that want to make us afraid that we don't know enough and there's not enough quantity, and that makes us better or gives us a degree in this. There is no degrees in what we're dealing with here, at least for comprehensively.
Well, that minute detail is somewhat debatable, because there are degrees to being a human being, and if you say, well, part of the problem that many people within the history of ideas fall short is that their grasp of what is a human being, and that is very much to the point of why Rudolf Steiner gave the name anthroposophy to spiritual science, because anthropos means a human, and Sophia is wisdom. So it's the wisdom of being human, and which is, I could be very thankful for him going to all that trouble, because they didn't give me an instruction manual when I was a little kid to figure all this stuff out. It was pretty challenging. But when you get into it and you look at it more closely, you have to, of course, come to the foundational ideas, of which we have a physical body. Everybody's familiar with that. But in esoteric science, we know that we also have an etheric body. That etheric body is that's the screen on which your astral nature can reflect ideas on behalf of the individual ego, the fourth member. So you have the physical, etheric, astral, and ego. That's the fourfold being of a human. And so the astral that's that cognitive aspect of it that you share with the animals. And that relates to the realm of dream. And then you have that etheric body, you share that with the plant kingdoms. Animals have an etheric body also, because it pertains to form and structure. So all the living things participate within that realm. And then you have a physical body that you share with the mineral kingdom. And so when you pass away, your body, your physical body, what's left, it returns according to the laws of the physical realm. And unfortunately, in the modern world in which we're living, the only realm that they tend to acknowledge is that corpse realm, that they approach things as if they're examining a corpse, because it's like their thinking is a corpse, so to speak, and that it only will admit certain ideas. They don't leave the door open so that these levels of higher thinking and perception can come in. But with this etheric body of memory and life, it ties into the glandular system in your body and that fluid nature. The astral body, its image in the human body is your nervous system and brain. But see, there's a real key thing that takes place between this astral and the etheric, because with the astral body, you gain these ideas, but if they don't reflect in the etheric body, you don't even know they're there. Okay, so you have to have that. That's why Rudolf Steiner says when you go to sleep at night, your ego, your individual I am, and this astral body, remember that you share with the animals of movement and cognition and all of that, well, they leave and go off to other levels of being, and the etheric body remains on the bed with the physical body, and it gives it a chance to regenerate from all the wild activity that's gone on within the astral body. That it has to reorient itself and reintegrate itself, and that's why you feel refreshed when you wake up in the morning, is that this etheric body has been able to reconsolidate itself and repair all the wear and tear of having this excited astral body inhabiting it with the ego. Now the ego's that's the one who's riding in the chariot. So you have the ego's riding in the chariot, he, she, whatever that is, whoever it is that they're in this chariot, and you have the three horses in front of the chariot. That's your physical, your etheric, and your astral body. And they all have their own direction in which they think things should go. And likewise, you have your thinking and feeling and will. And how many times have you asked somebody, well, what do you think about this? And they say, well, I feel. Or say, how do you feel about this? They go, well, I think, and then they go do something that's contrary to either one of those answers. So we have these divided possibilities within our own being. So at least the average individual will give us that much.
That's absolute truth. And then you have the road that they're on. And are you on the right path? And how many times have we said to ourselves, why am I doing this? I don't care what it is. And you would just stop. Whether I'm fatigued about doing this, I don't know, job, life task, whatever. What am I doing this for? What's this mean? And a lot of life is asking us that question all day long. Again, I'll go into these questions that don't have to be spiritual. They're just, why are you doing that? And how do you find out what really makes you happy? And I really think that's what's happening in our time. So many people feel dissatisfied. They're not in alignment with any type of a spiritual reality of themselves or the world, and we're out of sync. And our bodies aren't aligned, and then we're not aligned with the truth of the world. And so that you have this default world and our will and feelings and thinking are going in different directions on a crazy road, like a ride at Six Flags, and people just don't feel that they don't know what to do. They don't know what they should be, where they should go. And that's usually when it comes to crisis mode, not that it should, you can actually find your direction when you become helpless, when you become in a crisis mode. But you can manufacture the crisis and the helplessness every moment of life by just putting your foot down in your mind and saying, okay, what am I doing? And asking and waiting for an answer, which most people don't wait for. They don't wait for the conscience or for the response from the spiritual world. And they miss it, or they don't hear it, and they move forward without it. But I believe more and more in my interaction with people today is more and more people in all the chaos and the disorder, they're up against that insanity. They're able to all the evil in the world, they're able to identify more quickly what it is they want to do, because they're seeing all that they don't want. There can't be goodness, or there can't be these things, and the cognitive dissonance. It's just so much and coming at everybody, that not that we want that kind of world, but I believe people are going to be able to find their own way and path a lot easier in the horrible condition our world is in right now, because they're going to reject the insanity and they're going to get more centered.
Yes, and it can come from unexpected quarters, this sense of centering. I remember one of my mentors, and Douglas Gabriel, is his protege, Werner Glass, who was the head of Waldorf education in North America and a formidable individual. He was a direct student of Walter Johannes Stein, the great Grail researcher that was a direct student of Rudolf Steiner's. But in Werner Glass's work, you have this whole array of lectures. He had 50-some lectures that were his fundamental lecture courses. And in being able to enter into that and imbibe these ideas and then be able to not dwell on them, but let them actually become a part of you, that they work on you, the work of Rudolf Steiner. And this whole idea of having a discipline. In India, they have a word, it's sadhana. And sadhana is like one's spiritual practice, something that one does every day to be able to align themselves with their spiritual goals, whatever they may be. And while we're not pursuing an Eastern path here, nonetheless, there are certain fundamentals that cross all schools of thought. And so that we could just as easily be expressing most of our ideas within another tradition, because this is universally human. This isn't just for some small demographic group. And so, in studying the work of Rudolf Steiner and having the advantage of being able to study under figures like Werner Glass or Hans Geber, the physicist from Vienna that studied with for so many years, and going year after year and taking courses on the foundational books and being able to have that advantage. The thing that I've learned most from it is that the ultimate aspect of it is that it brought me into focus in my heart. But that was something that I had already been working on. It just gave me a greater courage and strength to be able to just keep moving with it. And I would make all kinds of errors and mistakes, but I'd always turn back to that as a source of balance and sustenance, because it really is a heart process we're talking about here. And one may be intimidated in their head because they don't have all the conceptual things that are figured out. But yet, the people that it's easiest to speak to are the people that they have a longing for this in the realm of the heart. And so the heart is real central to the mysteries of the Grail, because the heart is a grail. It's that center of your being in which you can receive the grace from the spiritual world in a way in which is not capable in other areas, because Rudolf Steiner describes about how there's this what one might even call miraculous process occurs within the heart, whereby through the warmth of heart we bathe the high centers in the head, the pineal and pituitary bodies, and that gives us this connection between the head and the heart. And I was able to enter into this field of activity even more profoundly, because the third head of the Waldorf Institute was Ralph Marinelli, and he was a interesting G5 engineer, like a civilian colonel at the tank plant that was here in Detroit at the time. But he was a real interesting character who always had a good joke and was capable of tremendous flow of levity. And so it made perfect sense when he came by the bookstore one day that I used to manage, the Mayflower. And he came by one day and he asked me if I could go to lunch with him. I said, yeah, sure. And Ralph was just great, you know. And so we went to lunch, and he said he had this new invention, is put these little holes in your dipstick in your automobile, and that would give you a more accurate gauging of how much oil was in there, because it would be caught in these little perforations in the dipstick. And he wanted to talk to Henry Ford II. He said he wanted to ask me, because he thought I was quite resourceful, how he could pull this off. I said, just tell a joke. He said, yeah, that's it. And so he went down to the Henry Ford's offices down in Dearborn, and he goes up the elevator, and he gets off on the floor where his offices are, and he's standing in the hallway, and just waiting for Henry Ford to show up, Henry Ford II. And Henry Ford happened to walk by, and Ralph catches eye contact with him and says, "You want to hear a joke?" And so Henry Ford invited him into his office, and he was able to spend a good half hour in his office, unscheduled. And so it has to do with like the moral initiative, is that you can count on the spiritual world to be able to fortify you in ways that you might not expect. And that's that whole idea of being fed by the ravens kind of thing, is that you don't know all the possibilities, you know. And I've had so many scenarios where I plowed into and just trusting that there would be ways in which resources and people and events would unfold that would make what I was attempting to achieve possible, but yet it might be entirely different from what I thought it was going to be, but yet it accomplished the goal. And so I guess that's kind of what we're looking at here.
Exactly. And that goes right back to Rudolf Steiner's, how I opened up with his chapter on whatever it was completely different than what the headline said. And then when you get to the end of the chapter or book, you find out that's exactly what it meant. But boy, did the path that he opens up with look completely different than you would think. And really, I guess that's the thought of the day in this little podcast we're doing, is that the appearance versus the apparent, which Rudolf Steiner speaks about, always seeking to look at apparently what's there, not what the appearance is. We get caught up in the world of appearances. We all do. It's just part of our life. But if we could take a moment, we would realize that connected, we see it in our own life path, that the roads that lead us to the next thing or to the next thing, to a husband and wife, to a vacation spot, to a museum, whatever happens to be, how we got there seemed so different than what we may have thought or that we were even interested in. And so this is why, what was it? I believe it was Paul says, do what you don't want. Try to seek. I forget how the reading goes in St. Paul, but somehow, man, that we can't want what we want. And sometimes when you do what you don't want, which sounds completely foreign to the modern marketing strategy, but Madison Avenue, but to do what we don't want, and especially if we do the things that we know we're supposed to do and have to do, and we procrastinate and don't want to do them, there's something there in those, not just because they're disciplined and they're good for us, but it's because in there's this kink that in us. I believe Rudolf Steiner speaks about this being, I won't mention his name, I'll call him Mr. S, and he has left a kink in humanity. And in that kink from the 7th century is still with us. And so we'll always have this feeling that something's wrong, but after we attempt to do these things that don't seem appealing to us, that we know we have to do or we should do, that we recognize, we feel a sense of, I feel so good. How could I feel so good? It was something I didn't even want. And I'm talking about daily tasks. You don't have to really go far into higher thinking and higher realities. Right here in the earthbound mundane, you'll find that there are things that in our life that we know we should do, we feel we should do, we could procrastinate against them, and we do them anyway. Not out of any type of sadism or masochism, but doing these things because we're driven and we don't want to. There's something very unsettling about the approach to the spiritual world, the approach to discover ourselves in life. And I found that if you can find the thing you don't want to do, you're halfway home.
Yeah, it's okay. You know, it's something that one can very quietly commit oneself to. That you got this thing and that you're working on, and you've made a decision with yourself, and out of that decision, new things are going to enter into your life as a result. If you go back to Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, of which Rudolf Steiner edited his scientific works, but he was the author of Faust and a great many other things. He's a towering figure. He's a household name all over Europe, but like Carlo Pietzner, who gave, one of my mentors, gave a lecture here, life without Goethe. In other words, what it's like in America where people don't know who that is. But Goethe says, first commit and the whole world will rise to help you. And so there's that whole idea of that there's magic in these ideas, that Christ, if you go to the early periods of Christianity, you'll see that the groupings of Christians at that time were more on the terms of hospitals. Okay, that's what they were. It wasn't just a ritualistic service, but it was that Christ had a healing ministry. That's what he did. And the greatest testimony of it is the Gospel of Mark. That has the greatest number of healing miracles that are explained in there, driving out demons and all of these things. And when you go into the Bible, it's a super sensible document. Don't forget. So if you like to think of yourself as being of the fold, so to speak, in whatever denomination, or even not even a member of any denomination, just somebody who is capable of entertaining the idea that there is a level of soul and spirit, if you enter into studying these scriptures that approach it from such different vantage points, it's quite remarkable the way in which they're held together within the realm of supersensible truth, that, as described by Rudolf Steiner and Emil Bach and other people within the coterie of people that were around Rudolf Steiner, so that you have this comprehensive view of scripture that is unparalleled. But in getting into that whole idea, it all hinges, and Christ is very clear about this, that you have to ask.
You have to ask. Reminds me of being in Venice back in the 1980s and walking the streets of Venice randomly, and I came across a stone right on the ground that said, Goethe was here, stood here, and wow. He was a towering figure, and that power of commitment, that commitment where the world, when we make a decision, because what we don't realize is, as we say, I've decided to commit, something else has been committing to us, and we think it's us that made the decision. The commitment versus a promise, or a hope or a wish. And we all know when we feel a commitment, I'm going to buy this, or even if it's a small little thing, or I'm going to go here, and you're going there. We don't recognize the difference between wandering, wondering, committing, wishing, hoping, and the commitment is something that changes everything. And we do this commitment every day of our life on so many levels. Again, we just don't spend the time to recognize our natural inclinations and habits. And it's only, again, when we reach that threshold, that crisis, that moment where commitment is being sought, we have to make a decision. What are we going to do? Fight or flight? Survive? It doesn't have to be pressed upon us, but it's amazing how the world is always there in our lives, waiting to open up, waiting to ask us through the crisis. It's saying, what will you do? And it doesn't speak it, but the situation is creating it, and it's part of our being that's actually brought the external factors in the material world upon us. And I remember that, I forget which book it is in Rudolf Steiner speaks about the two worlds, the world of if a tile falls off of a building and a man is walking by and a tile just misses him, by like a millisecond. He's not killed. The tile in the physical world was one reality. The moment and the guidance to miss it is another set of laws. So we have these physical laws and we have these spiritual laws. So when we speak of spirit, there are spiritual laws, there are things coming, and we all know it. It's just our time is not taught us, or we weren't taught it by school, by even religions, to know or identify the language of what these things are. So it's all become almost like superstition, and people have created their own little slogans and cliches about their own personal life, and we've all shared them, and we think it's luck or whatever. It's so there really is no body of knowledge that has given this to us. It's become our own created dogma of the world because we did not get it from our education at any level. And I believe that more and more people are going to bring back that common sense, that thing, that those drivers that lead us to know what to do. And right now, the world is leading us astray in medicine and science and so many other areas. So we're again at that really crisis moment in evolution where it's all upon each one of us to find it, because it won't be given in the outer world. More and more false paths, not the true path to Christ, are being presented to us.
Yes, that's the ultimate thing, and fortunately for us, it's been clearly pointed out when references made to Christ in you, and St. John says that there's this, he makes reference to this whole idea of conscience, and that's your guide. If you follow your heart, that you'll make mistakes, but you'll never go wrong. And that's the key, and that's what you can rest easy in, because it takes courage to be able to do that. And courage is a heart force. Courage, that's the lion. And of course, Jesus Christ was the lion of the tribe of Judah. So there's a reason why they use a lion to represent. And also in the Cathedral of St. Mark, you have that giant lion. And so what is that? Who was St. Mark? What did he do? Well, St. Peter sent him down to Egypt. And it was in Egypt that he passed the gospel on to the head of the sanctuary, the Serapeum, the sanctuary of Serapis, which was an Egyptian Greco-Roman phase of the spiritual life down in the region of the Delta in ancient Egypt. And this individual's, his legendary name is Ormuz, and which can be related, you could see, to Ormuz or Ormuzd, even Persian implications, because that's the being of light in the Zarathustrian tradition, the great sun being that Zarathustra spoke about, and the three magi were seeking out, that's shown in the Gospel of Matthew. But St. Mark goes to Egypt, and he ends up dying in Egypt eventually, and the Coptic church, the Egyptian church, kept the body of St. Mark. But eventually Venetian raiders from the city of Venice, they stole the body of Mark, and that's at the Cathedral of St. Mark in Venice. But the Egyptians, they tend to do things a little different, and they still had the heart. So the heart of Mark is still in Egypt, but the rest of him is in Venice. So you want to be able to take that heart of yours and make it very singular part of your life, because that's what's going to guide you. And in light of that, going back to Ralph Marinelli, we had the Rudolf Steiner Research Center outside of Detroit, and we were able to prove through scientific studies that the heart is not a pump. And that was the big eureka moment. And that work is still kind of quietly working its way. But Rudolf Steiner indicated that it was necessary that people would come to understand that the heart is not a pump for the evolution of consciousness to unfold in a wholesome way. And so that was a riddle that really came to us through the work of Aaron Pfeiffer. And of course, those of you that follow my podcast know that it was his diagrams, Aaron Pfeiffer's hand-drawn watercolor diagrams, that formed the foundation of my two books, the Arcana of the Grail Angel and the Arcana of Light on the Path, where I present the cosmology of Rudolf Steiner. But in being able to prove that the heart is not a pump is such a discrete concept that just in meditating on the idea of the heart as being so much more than that. It's an organ of cognition. It responds to every sensory input that you receive, whether super sensible or sensible, that it's like your command central. Basically, that's the organ of the human ego that indwells the blood, as Rudolf Steiner says. And so there's so many aspects to it. If you get into the yogic system, they talk about the 12 petals of the heart chakra. Well, there you have a zodiac, right? And then in the brain, you have the 24 cranial nerves. That's 2 pairs of 12. So you have the zodiac inscribed in the dome of the skull, which is an image of the heavens, so to speak. So there's a lot of things that one can approach artistically or meditatively or even scientifically. But just to get into a little bit here, I'm the author of 2 books. My principal work is the Arcana of the Grail Angel, the spiritual science of the Holy Blood and of the Holy Grail, a study developed out of the work of Rudolf Steiner of the underground streams of esoteric Christianity, which flowed from the Brotherhood of the Holy Grail to the Order of the Knights Templar and the True Rosicrucian Order. It has a foreword by my best buddy, Douglas Gabriel, and it has the Pfeiffer diagrams that I was referring to transcribed by myself, and a great many more added to it that can help one keep all these complex cosmological ideas organized. It's very helpful. And in my second volume, I created a great many more diagrams, and that's the Arcana of Light on the Path, with a foreword by William Bento, the noted teacher of star wisdom, astrosophy, and psychologist, anthroposophist. And so those 2 books, only the second book is available at this time. It's available from me on eBay. If you're outside the US, you can contact me through private message on Facebook or the academia link below. I also want to thank people that have helped made this podcast possible. And that's, of course, Tyler and Douglas and Vadim and Vivian and Tim and Neil and Ray and Whitney and James and Marilyn, and there's lots of other people, but the list, it gets so long, and I tend to try and emphasize more of the people that are reoccurring sponsors. And for those of you that contribute, you can give me your information, and I send out all kinds of things. Like I just finished editing Rudolf Steiner's comparative lecture on the relationship to the Northern mysteries to the mysteries of the East, of India, which is, they have similarities in ways that one would not guess. And so I just this morning finished editing that to make it more readable, because some of Rudolf Steiner's lectures were just like, there wasn't even a stenographer in his early lectures, and so they just take these notes and they cobble these things together, and sometimes it's hard to figure out what they're talking about. But I feel happy with my result from that, so that's well and good. And if somebody would like to buy me a cup of coffee, that's paypal.me/Joe John Barnwell 888. And please share and click like. And there, I think I covered all the bases that are going to keep this thing moving forward. And so I pass it back to you.
Well, I'm a purchaser of those books. I glanced through one of them yesterday for about 5 minutes. I've been so busy, and I've got like 12 books behind yours, but I'll do yours first. And yeah, the graphs are great because you could see almost like a blueprint of the buildings. I talked about the hut and the building of the buildings. You get to take whatever you're reading in this imagination and see it. And of course, it becomes living when you take it off the blueprint, like building the house. It's a different dimension, but you definitely have those what I call channel markers and guides to activate your memory. Well, these images are stored in our etheric, and images are put there in our memories. And so it's a great reference, especially in your moments of crisis when you need to reach for a book or something and get an answer. Sometimes the answer isn't words. Sometimes it is holding the cross or a photograph of Michelangelo's paintings or something. And so it jogs us out of our own individual groupthink that we have going on in our own mind. But I really appreciate speaking with you, Doug. I mean, see, I'm on the phone with Doug so much and with John so much that I have them both completely commingled in my mind for, I'd say, the last 3 weeks. I've been doing so much programming with them. And then we're on the phones together. And I don't know, it's like the Three Amigos going on right now. But it's amazing to get the feedback from the people that are listening and watching. And that's so helpful for people to make comments. Because we can never know, and I'm seeing that by comments on Doug's videos, I haven't checked yours out yet, that people, one thing we say, just one thing, and all of a sudden, something hit a chord. You just don't know what chord that is. It's the same thing if you pick a book up or the Bible and you open to a chapter. Sometimes it's like, wow, how did I open to that? And that one chord, that thing you need, is there. It's always there. And so it's really great doing these programs for both you fellas, because I think we're providing links and triggers and information in a way that does things to people we just can't quantify. But that means we still have to push forward, like we're Columbus crossing the Atlantic Ocean, not knowing what's ahead. We just got to keep going west.
Yeah. Go west, young man. Go west. Well, it's very satisfying for me because I feel I've been so privileged as I've been exposed to so much, and like this massive thing here is the 4-volume bibliography that I did on one of the largest private Egyptology and Mesopotamian studies and libraries of Dr. Marjorie Fisher, the noted Egyptologist, and with the relational database that I was able to compile. And in exploring all of these ancient lands and their traditions, it was the work of Rudolf Steiner that gave me the capacity to be able to come to terms with the mysteries of time, that there is a difference as to when things happen. And in the modern world today, they just want us to be space beings. We just occupy a certain space, and everybody today is just like people in ancient Egypt, except the people in ancient Egypt didn't know the stuff that we know. That kind of a litany, which couldn't be further from Rudolf Steiner's description of the actual experience of the ancient Egyptians regarding their world and their relationship to supersensible beings, and being able to take direction from the spiritual world in their clairvoyant capacity, so that it's shall we say radically different. But you have to have a provision for those types of faculties to be able to understand Holy Scripture, because so many times it's what happens. Well, Archangel Gabriel shows up and makes an annunciation. And so you have these angels coming in and out of the stories. And it's like, what is that? Is that something really real, or is this just like some kind of a metaphor? And it reminds me of C.S. Lewis walking with J.R.R. Tolkien, two of the Inklings, and you know, the C.S. Lewis is an expert at Oxford. He's an Oxford Don, and he's dealing with early English studies, and you can't separate that from Scripture. And so he was as thoroughly familiar with Scripture as someone could be, especially concerning the King James version of the Bible, the 1611 edition. And he's walking with Tolkien, and he says, but you know, and he's making reference to the myths in the Bible, and J.R.R. Tolkien turns to him, he says, but they're true. And that was the eureka moment for C.S. Lewis, the idea that the events in the Bible really happened. And so it's an awakening process, and it's something that somebody has to come onto all by themselves. You know, I mean, other people can influence you or not, but in the end, it's you that has to be able to follow your heart and make the decision, because then it has a special quality, and it puts you in a special relationship to the dispensation of grace that's been promised to you for so doing. And so it's a wonderful thing. And it's great to use that, because it chases away the fear, because that's God's armor for you, that you have the divine spiritual beings that are sitting there patiently waiting for you to come up with something that's going to make them happy. And so every aspect that you can come up with that has moral imagination, moral inspiration, or moral intuition, it's a celebration for the beings, the divine spiritual beings, that you were able to offer that up to the spiritual world as your contribution to Earth evolution and to evolution as a whole, because they're evolving too, and they're learning from us. And so it's a wonderful, it's a banquet, you know. It's like it's the Last Supper, and but at the Last Supper, Christ, he blesses the bread and wine, and he says, do this in memory of me. So maybe, you know, since he said that, it might be a good idea to do that. Bless your meals, consecrate it, be thankful to the mineral realm, be thankful to the realm of the plants, be thankful to the realm of the animals, be thankful to the spiritual beings, and most of all, be thankful to God in Christ. And if one can bring that kind of reverence into one's life, I can only tell you it's transformative. It changes your perspective on the world, and it changes your consciousness into a healthy modality to which you can find a smoother relationship to the stormy world. And so it's in that spirit that I'd like to offer up now Christ's breastplate, a prayer by St. Patrick. Christ before me, Christ behind me, Christ to my right, Christ to my left, Christ beneath me, Christ above me, Christ within me. And thank you all so much. Take care, Joe.
Thank you, John.